just a quick disclaimer. Yes, I'm not a medical professional, and I don't provide medical advice, and the information provided may be incomplete and or incorrect. I'm pretty sure it is. Preparing for this presentation, I reread some things, and it's like, yeah, I forgot about it. Oh, yeah, that's how that was. So probably a lot of that is incorrect, but that's fine. That's not the purpose of this presentation. I gave this presentation at the UMTA State Conference just a couple months ago, and when Dr. Allred and I talked about the conference, I said, I just presented that, so I don't know. I have other things I could talk about too, and but would that, no, she said, definitely present that again. That is such a relevant topic and subject. And I said, okay. So here we are. This is, I think, the third iteration of the Healthy Pianist series that it is now, and some of you have seen every single one of them. But what is fascinating is, I think, the progression, and this is a subject where we're, I think, never kind of at the, we never quite reached the goal. Last year, in this very place, I just hinted at body mapping. I just came across it and started looking into that. By now, I've bought several books, and I'm actually a member of the Association for Body Mapping Educators, I believe. I think it's a fascinating and very relevant topic. So anyway, I became re-interested in the subject because there just continue to be injured students that hurt, colleagues, friends. So it seems to be a relevant subject. The reason for me to do presentations is very simple. I work very well with deadlines. Otherwise, I'm like, yeah, that's interesting. I want to read that. And then, the book's sitting there and following you. It's the same deal. But if I have a presentation, I kind of have to put something together. The reason why it's not the most relevant to have all of the slides and the handout is because the presentation is really meant to be food for thought. I think it's a lot about experimenting with things and just going like, oh yeah, I haven't thought about that before. That's the same QR code, just goes to the handout. When I very first started to talk about or look into that, that's when I had a student who was actually not a piano major anymore. At that point, she started as a double major and then switched to a different instrument. And she had quite a bit of health challenges, and I started to look a little bit into the subject. And what is interesting is that there are several studies that have examined the problem of injuries with in musicians. It started with a couple studies about orchestral musicians, but there have also been different studies now over the year that are particular, in my case, for college students, such as this one. I actually happened to meet the two authors at another similar conference to this one. But they did a study of their undergraduate students, and that they found that 80% of respondents, undergraduate students, said they experience pain associated with playing. And what is kind of shocking is that 6% of that student body of music majors feels pain every time they play or sing. And that shouldn't be. Sometimes there's medical conditions, that's a different story. But it's just kind of a shocking number. What's almost more shocking to me is there was a study about high school music students in Germany, and we basically have a multi-tiered system, and one high school is kind of geared toward preparing you for the university, and they did a questionnaire about pain and playing a musical instrument, and pretty much nobody said that it's normal to feel pain, and it's crazy. But we also have specialized music high schools. And when they did the same survey at that school, you can see the numbers. About a quarter of parents and students say, well, of course, if you play an instrument, you're supposed to, it's supposed to hurt. You want to learn stuff. And another quarter was like, I don't have a strong opinion. It's probably, probably part of it. And that's just kind of a shocking number, I think. So what is body mapping? I have a couple definitions, but I don't know how many of you remember, but I did a little experiment last year that kind of got me started. So I'll just do it again. So if you just run with me, even if you know it. Could you all do what I'm doing? All right, that's great. That's awesome. Right hand or left hand. But the question is, how did you do that? Because you can't see where you're putting your hand, right? You obviously can't smell or taste. It's like your senses don't really play a part in that. But we have internal maps of our bodies that kind of, we kind of know where stuff is, even if we don't use our senses. That makes sense. And there's supposedly a debate about how many senses we have, and Dr. Smith talked about the kinesthetic sense, and there's all kinds of other senses that I've started to learn about. But the idea is really that we just know where stuff is in our bodies. Or so we think. Sometimes, if you're a teenager and you grow really fast, sometimes it's awkward to do certain things, certain movements, because, the legs are suddenly longer and, you trip going up the stairs, or, there's all kinds of situations like that. Here's are a couple of official definitions. So Amy Leicar is the director of this association. They used to be Andover educators. William and Barbara Conable were the founders of that. They came out of Alexander technique. So that is kind of an official definition. Your body map is your self-representation in your brain of your own body, how you think it is and how you think you move. Body mapping is the conscious correction and refinement of your body map. And that's, I think, important that this is an ongoing process. This is nothing to memorize, it's just something that we can learn and probably have to adapt to. Maybe we have an injury at some point, and we have to kind of remap how we move, how we walk up the stairs, and so forth. There's another definition by Thomas Mark, who wrote the book What Every Pianist Needs to Know About the Body. He says, body mapping is an activity in which, through the training of attention and the refinement of kinesthesia, information ceases to be external and becomes internal, part of the representation in the brain governing movement. And again, I think the key is that this is an activity. It's nothing to study, nothing to just tell somebody, but it's an activity. Something that often comes up with Alexander technique, and body mapping practitioners have adopted that, is the idea of inclusive awareness. And they really don't like the idea of concentration, because I think I have the slides here. Concentration means directing attention to one thing and shutting out everything else. And that means if you're playing, on a finger passage or whatnot, and that's all we're focusing on, you're missing a lot of what is going on. For one example that kind of came to mind when I put this together is sometimes I have students who are really good sight readers, but maybe rhythmically not that great, or they're really good technically. And sometimes they would be playing with a metronome. I use a different app for sight reading that actually goes with a click, which I guess Piano Marble does too. But they would play correct notes all the way through, but the metronome is nowhere near where the beats are. And for me, that's impossible. I mean, the click is there. I'm playing with this thing. I can't knock it out. But if you're concentrating on the notes or on your fingers, right, you're missing the click. They oftentimes don't hear the click. Or I remember starting to accompany and do a lot of chamber music, and sometimes I would be playing my part, and my partner would say, so did I do all right? Anything you need me to do? I have no recollection of what was going on in the other instrument whatsoever. And again, with inclusive awareness, we're shifting the main part of our attention to one part, which is maybe the playing or the metronome or whatnot, but we're still aware of everything else. And that's also an activity that I think we can practice. And I think now sometimes I wonder what's going on, what my students think of me in lessons, because I'm trying to observe some of those things and work with some of those things, or in presentations, because I learned that I should be aware of the space that I'm in. And so I'm actually, subconsciously now going, well, how high do I feel that the ceiling is above me? When you think about it, it's actually, I think this room is getting quite large. If I don't think about it, I'm kind of stuck here if I don't think about it. It's quite tall. And when I play music and I'm aware of that, I think I may play differently. Or, what am I doing with my hands? Or, there's all kinds of things we can be aware of. So, according to body mapping educators, the appropriate mental state for musicians is one of inclusive awareness attention. So why should we look into body mapping? Attending to our movements without proper information may just serve to reinforce our current habits, since we are likely to call good whatever we are accustomed to. We may know that a certain way of moving doesn't feel good, but we don't know how to improve it or how to accomplish the pianistic task any other way. Natural is different from the feeling of normal to someone whose habits are poor. I think that's an important one. And again, it's an ongoing process. For me, this is totally normal and feels totally healthy and natural to sit like that. I have to admit I was observing some of you guys earlier too to see how you are sitting. I may not be the only one, but this feels natural to me. If I sit more properly, this doesn't feel bad, but it actually feels pretty good. And this chair leans back a little bit, so I feel like I have to compensate for it. But if it would be maybe a different chair, this is how I play piano. It feels natural that I'm at the piano, but when I'm sitting at the kitchen table, I have to remind myself, wait a second, this is actually a pretty natural way to sit, and this is actually maybe not the best way to sit. That makes sense. And that is sometimes difficult, I think, with teaching piano, for example, because something may feel very natural for us as teachers because we've practiced it and we ask the student, just make it feel, that it feels free and open and natural, but for them that may mean something totally different. There's an interesting experiment that initially when I read the book the first time, and that's from Kay Hooper's book, that's at the end of the presentation, I actually skipped it because it seemed like, but I think if we all kind of join in, I did it this time when I reread, there's something to that. So if we all just bend our arms from the elbow, that's pretty easy. That is if we are thinking that our joint is right here. So now if we imagine that the elbow joint is here, now we try to do the same thing. And again, I didn't think that would do anything because I'm like, I don't have anything, but I tried to move my arm from here. I felt like I'm doing this, so if you all try to move and bend your arm from up here, it's kind of, right, you're kind of stuck, so I think I kind of can do it. And it's kind of a weird sensation. That's why I skipped it the first time. But like that, totally fine. But like this, it's like, it doesn't quite go, so I'm trying with my body and whatnot. And with piano playing, if we mismap some of our body parts or our joints or whatnot, we may try to move things that are not movable. And that's kind of a tough thing to do. That may cause a problem. Anyway, I didn't set up the presentation the way that I can actually see my notes on that. But there's an interesting experiment that I did at the UMTA conference, so those of you who saw it, hopefully you remember. But it's fascinating. one of those things that I didn't know. And I still don't quite believe it. But when we sing the national anthem, all of us put our hands on our hearts, right? So if we all do that, if we pretend we have somebody here that sings the national anthem, a couple who pay attention. So if somebody has, medical problem and we need an EpiPen or one of those things, I would totally puncture their lung and not put it in the right spot because the heart is right here in the middle. And after I read that, I was like, of course I knew that, but it's so counterproductive, so counterintuitive. We have the heart muscle that's on this side is a little bit bigger and works a little bit harder, as that's where the blood goes to the entire body. But the heart is actually right center. It makes sense because you want to protect the heart, and it's much more protected in here underneath the sternum and whatnot than it is on the side. But we do this so often that it just feels like the heart is there. My wife is a scientist and did the same thing.
I think it's just because our hand, the way our hand is shaped, that's more natural. It feels weird to go here because you have to adjust the angle of your arm and move it over. So I don't think people are thinking physiologically. They're just going where it's coming.
No, it's like
right. They're thinking patriotically, not physiologically.
No, it's just a habit. But I'm like, I have to consciously tell myself if I'm even now doing this experiment. There. No, it is in the middle. It's just so ingrained. So body mapping is basically mapping our bodies, and that's where just a lot of, that's where the activity comes in. I bought a little skeleton for the presentation at the UMTA conference. I called it Max. I have no idea why. I never name anything. Not my cars, no nothing, but this thing came out of the box and I was like, that's Max. I was going to bring Max today, but then I forgot. But I think that's very useful to see a skeleton, because there's a lot of things that I think you're not quite sure where they are. And some of that is perception, and some of that is maybe really not knowing where things are. It's really hard for me to convince myself that the eyes are not at the top of my head. It just doesn't seem right. It's weird, but I've now looked at this so often that I'm like, yes, I know, I'm okay with knowing, but it still feels weird to think that the heads are in the middle of our heads. Something else that is kind of always a little bit of a challenge, and still doesn't quite feel right. But with all of you, point to where your spine meets your heads. All right, pretty good. Some of you are right there, and some of you not so much. They're actually right here. Which makes sense because our heads are, like that, and to balance it, you would balance, kind of in the middle and not in the back. And most of us feel like, right, it's the spine comes up here and then it meets the head right there. But the spine is actually much further in the body. So that's just the very outside edge of the spine. And the spine, the back actually has like, how are they called? I forgot the technical term, but we'll see it in a second. Anyway, the ear marks the approximate center front to back. And that's why it makes sense to have the spine meet the head there. The jaw is not part of the skull. That's also an interesting one. I'm an amateur flute player, and I've accompanied for lessons before when I was in graduate school, and they talked about it. Seems to make sense, but my intuition is like, I'm playing, that's how I'm breathing. And in some ways that doesn't make sense because the top part is fixed, that doesn't do anything. The way we open the mouth is through the jaw, and that's actually a separate entity. So the proper way to breathe would be to just lower the jaw, and I can breathe. I don't have to tilt my head or use muscles or whatnot. Here is a picture, and again, if we would have Max here, you could, after the session, go to Max and examine and look at all of that stuff. So yes, so that's where you can see the ears, and the spine is right underneath that. So one of the mapping errors, and that's the term that Thomas Mark uses in his book, is that the skull is supported toward the back, that the head includes the jaw and the neck begins at the bottom of the jaw, and that the jaw is in front of the ribs. That's an interesting one. That wasn't in any of the books, but my wife was looking at Max. Max was in our living room for a couple of weeks, and was a little bit creepy sometimes at night. But she actually noticed that for her, the jaw is in front of the body, and she was like, one night she looked at Max and was like, she started touching her jaw and moving it around and stuff. She was like, I just think that the jaw is in front of the body. And I was looking at Max, and the jaw is actually, if you think about your rib cage, the jaw is actually behind. And I was like, that's a really strange sensation. But it's true. I feel like my jaw is about, there, and I feel like my eyes are about here. And I also feel that my head attaches back there. So there you can see where the jaw actually lines up with the ribs. So, with playing piano, if I'm thinking, my jaw is supposed to be up here, I'm attaching here, and, the jaw is kind of connected to everything. That changes how I move. Rather than when I think, okay, I'm kind of balancing, the spine is in the middle, kind of here, and my jaw is actually further back. I think just being aware of that, right, changes how we move. Here is another just picture of, this is not Max, but of the skeleton sitting. And that is also something that I think oftentimes we have good intentions, but it doesn't come across quite right. So I may not have the best posture, and I think I have an explanation that I think I gave you last year. I won't go into that story today, but anyway, it may just be that I was a teenager and I wanted to be cool and whatnot. But of course, my parents bugged me, stand straight and be straight and teachers and all of that stuff. And they would say, yeah, that's better, and I'm like, this doesn't feel good whatsoever. And go to piano lessons, sit up straight, or stand against the wall. And now looking at that, I'm like, yeah, I know that they meant really well, but the spine is really not a straight column. And that's what makes the spine so secure and so solid, is that it actually does have the curves. And if you think about, I think breaking a straight stick is much harder than one that is already bent and is more flexible. So here, processes is what I was looking for earlier. So that's what we feel in the back. You can see that the processes are actually quite a bit away from the center of the spine, and that's what actually supports our heads. Another mapping error that goes into that unit, I got that a little bit from Thomas Mark's book, is that the tailbone bears weight and we rock the pelvis backward for sitting. And I think all of us tend to do that when we have a back rest. We kind of do this. And if you're kind of aware of the sitting bones, the rockers, what we do is oftentimes we just roll backwards on them, and then the lower back kind of gets the curve, and then we're sitting like this. The tailbone would be what you're then sitting on, and apparently there can be injury if you're sitting too much or put too much weight on the tailbone. The tailbone doesn't have any weight-bearing responsibilities. Weight is supported in the back. Again, that's kind of what we oftentimes feel because we feel the spine on the outside, so it feels like the spine is going down in the back. And I think I move differently and I sit differently if I feel that the weight is in the back, rather that it's basically in the center of our bodies. Again, it's something that makes sense. If I would be constructing a body, I wouldn't, put all the weight here and support it here, but I would support in the middle. But it's just kind of hard to just comprehend and to be okay with that, because my spine is back here. I can feel it. Right? It's at the back of my back. This is an interesting one that also my wife got. Again, she got to experience Max for a little bit, and I ran it by her when I prepared for the UMTA presentation. I have no expertise in this. I think I'm glad that she had to do all the work. Thanks to all of you. But she said, being pregnant made me notice my center of balance, and I could feel that my pelvis was supporting the weight of my torso rather than the back of my spine. And I don't know if some of you can relate to that, but it again kind of makes sense. Spinal movement, I think, is also something that's good to just kind of think about and to experiment with. So with our structure and the curves, we have discs, and they permit the movement of the vertebrae. Movement should not be concentrated more in one region of the spine. So usually, when we bend, right, we say bend from the waist. Yeah, that makes sense. This is where it seems to bend. It's like, it's kind of flexible here, but we actually, the waist actually doesn't exist. That's not a joint. You can't really bend from the waist. But if we try that, now I'm putting a lot more strain on some of the vertebrae than if I'm thinking I'm actually bending from the hip joint through the entire spine. So now I distribute it through the entire spine. So again, it's kind of interesting. Also something that makes sense, but it's just ingrained to move from the waist. I don't know. That's where I feel it. This is kind of going the opposite direction. Another mapping error that we have is that the O joint seems to be frozen in the head and neck move as a unit from the base of the neck. So basically, the head sits on two vertebrae, and one allows the head to do this movement, and the other one is that movement. So one of those vertebrae kind of spins that way, and it hooks into the one that's below. And if we think that all of that is one unit, now I'm of course moving like a little bit like a robot. That also puts more strain on the spine than it should. So if that's individual, I can do a lot of stuff where I don't need to put any strain on the spine. I don't know where I put this experiment in the presentation, because like I said, I forgot to display the notes on here, and I don't want to ruin the connection that is established. But what is kind of interesting is if all of you maybe focus on something that's pretty close to you, and then you kind of just start focusing more on the distance and further away. I think what happens naturally is like, our eyes kind of go there, and then the head naturally follows. Or if you rather not want to, look at me or at your person in front of you, if we, for example, want to look out the window, I think what happens is like naturally, my eyes go and then the rest follows. If I turn further, then the spine follows. Now, if you do the same experiment, but maybe the window is better, then I don't have to feel awkward about looking one of you straight in the face. But if I'm trying to look out the window, and I'm moving my head first, and then I let the eyes follow, that's really hard to do. Isn't that fascinating? It's a very, very weird feeling. I know. I have to focus to actually be able to do that. It's like one process, and then I can do the next process, and then I can move the spine. So anyway, fascinating experiment. And again, if we're not body mapping the correct way, we may actually put a lot more work into some of the things that we do than if we know how stuff works and take advantage of that. Here's the pelvis. I'm just going to go over that. I'm going to skip foot 2, because the arm is what we're mostly concerned with, I think, as pianists, rightly so or not rightly so, and it's obvious because we use the arm. I have another quiz question. Where do your arms start? Here. You've had to listen to it every week, probably for months now. But our arms actually start right here. That's the only point that they are attached to the body. So we've got the collarbone, and then we've got the humerus, and then we've got 2 bones in here. And we can easily, I think, show that if you kind of just hold your collarbone in place, and then you try to move your arm over. I'm like, this is how far I can get. And if you know somebody who's broken their collarbones or whatnot, you know that this is kind of a problem movement. If we let go and move all the way from here, all of a sudden, I can reach pretty far. So when we're playing piano, if I feel that my arm begins here, this is how far I can play comfortably. And then I have to do those sorts of movements. But if I'm moving my arm from here, I can easily reach the entire keyboard with one arm. I don't have to move my spine, I don't have to move anything. Another common mapping, however, is that the shoulder blade belongs on the back and is connected to the spine and or the ribs. I can swear that it is. I've now learned that it isn't, but it always seems to make sense to me that the shoulder blade, right, that's connected to the ribs on the back. And it's actually not. They're just kind of free-floating and support any movement that we were doing with your arms. And the idea of body mapping is that hopefully, in the course of the day, I will be really happy if I walk down the hallway, during lunch or something, I see some of you going like, so I think that's really the food for thought part that I was talking about. I'm going to skip that part. Here you can see a picture. You can see there's muscles underneath the scapula of the shoulder blade, and you can see where the humerus actually attaches and then goes to the collarbone. There's another interesting part that I want to get to, and I think we're unfortunately out of time. But this is a nice experiment that we can do with our students, or with ourselves for that matter. We have 2 bones in our forearm, and they do different things. And oftentimes with piano playing, we say, you use rotation, and that is perfect. I believe in rotation. It's a great thing to do. But one way that we can kind of show that we're either rotating correctly or incorrectly is, I do that oftentimes on a piece of paper, but maybe give me a hand for a second and just trace my, kind of just my hand arm outside. Perfect. Perfect.
Thank you.
So when I'm rotating, again, another quiz question, should my hand end up in the same position? So if we take another outline of it, or should it be somewhere else? And actually, would you mind doing another line?
I think it's going to move, but I could be wrong.
So I'm gonna flip it 180 degrees. Good. Hold on for 1
Okay.
second. So that's what most often happens. I think what should happen is perfect. That the hand actually lines up in a different spot. And the reason is that one of our bones, the one on the pinky side, is actually doing this movement, and it's connected to the humerus. That's why, if we're doing monkey bars, we usually hang on the pinky side because that's the strong side. But our intuition is that the thumb side is the strong side. So when I'm rotating, and I'm doing it the wrong way, basically doing this. However, the thumb side is where the radius is, and that's the bone that kind of crosses. So it just sits here in the elbow, and then it crosses. So the ulna actually stays. And all that we're rotating is the top bone. So that's actually kind of, in that sense, the flexible bone. That means when we're rotating with that, if I leave the pinky side in place, I'm getting basically, if you do this butterfly, there's a thing that kids do, that's the butterfly. Perfect. Taylor has it. So anyway, I think that's just one of those cases where I think sometimes we mean well and we encourage students to use rotation, but if we don't know how stuff works in our body, we may try to do it just the wrong way. And again, if I'm trying to rotate with this bone, so I'm trying to move this bone over, this is what I have to do. So I have to lift my arm, my shoulder, and whatnot. If I'm rotating just the thumb side, this is what I have to do. Also kind of, I think, fascinating. And I have to admit, I'm not very good with that medical stuff, and sometimes feeling like I better sit down for that. But in the end, I think that's how we learn, by feeling and just observing and just trying out stuff. On the end, here are those resources. The hand is another interesting one. So if you can go back to the slide and kind of experiment where bones are and that stuff, it's very fascinating. Here are some of the books that I would recommend. Kay Hooper's book is one where I took a lot of those, try this, try that sort of stuff, which is very interesting because she's very much just try it, it's an activity. Thomas Mark, this is a great book for pianists in particular. He's more like, he's lecturing, but a lot of very useful information. Initially, I thought maybe I make today's presentation a little bit about teaching body mapping to children by Jennifer Johnson, as I thought, if we can teach kids, that's good for me because they put it in a way that I understand it too. And I think it's a very useful book, it's an interesting book. But some things I think are in that book are well meant, but don't quite, offer solutions. For example, she has a chapter on, we should be aware how we say things. So for example, if we tell a student just relax, that's maybe not the best way to do that because, if I'm really relaxing, I'm going to end up on the floor. It's just a balance. But then the alternatives that she offers is like, a 2-paragraph thing of what we should do. And, in a lesson to tell a student a 2-paragraph instruction, I'm going with, just relax. And if there's a problem, then maybe I explain. But anyway, in terms of getting just an introduction to the subject, that's a very easy and fast read. And Barbara Conable, I guess, is kind of regarded as the founder of body mapping. I think that's what I've got. So.